I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity to be here. I'll sing a song that is from my clan, from my family, and that I learned with my grandfather. It's a ceremonial song. First of all, for the rivers, because in our nation we know that life began in the water, and so we sing to the waters all the time. And then to the forests. The forest in our language is yoko. And so this is giving thanks to the Great Spirit for all this beautiful creation that we are the sons and daughters of. This is a song when we arrive in new places, and I just came from Paris, but before I was in Brazil, far away from here. And we use this song to compliment to when we arrive in new places. And for me, it's being really strange because it's a song for the forest and I miss it so much. We live in the largest forest in the world, the Amazon rainforest. And now we have reached 20% of deforestation of this Amazon. And when we reach 25% of deforestation, it will desertify. It won't last forever. The indigenous territories protect 22% of biodiversity in the world. We concentrate this life because we think and we relate differently with this life everywhere. And we are walking all over the world to share all this love for nature. And I am really, really happy and really happy to be here and meet new people that really work for that, because we feel the same thing. What is important? So sharing this song is not just art, it's not just a song, it's sharing the spirit of the forest. And I'm really glad to share it with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I had not heard of Tree Sisters before, but I thought the very name was an alluring and definite urge to participate. My own qualifications are limited, except that most extraordinarily, I had a great friend who was an extremely rich man. I don't have many rich friends, but he happened to be accidentally rich as far as I could tell. But anyway, he was a publisher. He published computer magazines when computers were invented. His name was Felix Dennis, and he was also a poet. And on his deathbed, he called me up and he said, I haven't got any living relatives. I thought, God, my ship is in. I haven't any living relatives, but I'm going to leave all my money to the planting of a 30,000 acre forest north of Stratford-on-Avon. I wanted to be called the Heart of England Forest. And so far we've planted, he said, I want you to be the chair, and we've planted 8,500 acres, which is nothing by comparison with what Clare does every waking moment of the day. But at any rate, we are planting English broadleaf trees. The difficulty at the moment is Brexit, because Brexit is holding up land sales. It's very difficult to buy land. A lot of farmers want to get out of land up there. It's a perfect place to do it. Well, we're going to deliver. We have 3 patches of land, big patches of forest. Of course, if you visit, it tends to be a lot of plastic, but you know what that is. That's all about resisting the squirrels. But we've also mature trees as well. But anyway, there we are now. Having said that and justified my being here at all, here is Clare Dubois. Give her a good welcome.
Good grief.
And we're standing up to put you at ease, because if we sit down, you won't see us. And I always think you need to see the person who's talking to you, if at all possible, unless you're on the telephone. So, Clare, Tree Sisters, go for it.
Before I do, thank you so much for being here. You know, the fact that you can read the news and then miraculously appear is extraordinary.
Thank the bicycle.
Thank the bicycle. Thank the bicycle. I want to thank you all. This is not a minor miracle for me, to be perfectly honest with you, that you're all here. And Howard, it wasn't a crazy idea, for the brilliant idea of doing this. Yeah. And for everybody that I know has been sending out the invites and reaching out, and to my team as well, who've done so much to help this happen, and to the Conduit Club. We think we know why we're here. I always like to hand it over to the mystery, because this happening, these minutes that we have together, have never happened before and will never happen again, ever. And so there is a completely unique constellation here. And that brings all the ingredients of your brilliance, of your audacity, of your complete uniqueness, which creates a particular recipe that is a one-time recipe. And we don't know what this beingness actually has in terms of its potential at all. Now, I have a roaring agenda, and I will own it, and that is to seed each one of you into the heart of Tree Sisters somewhere, so that between us we can take this to scale, because it needs to go to scale. And not just Tree Sisters, anything that is to do with restoring our planet needs to go to scale, and needs to go to scale really fast.
But before you do, I want to ask you about what you said at the beginning of the whole session.
Which was?
Well, what was said about you? That you were planting how many thousand?
It's not me.
No, but I mean you. Look, we are all you, and we are all we.
We meaning a lot of indigenous peoples, a lot of men and women, a lot of women actually across Cameroon and Nepal and Brazil, North and South India, Madagascar, and where else have I forgotten? God. 2 major projects in Madagascar.
Madagascar needs trees, my God.
Madagascar
Raped.
needs trees extremely
trees ravaged, a place that had trees,
yeah,
and then had them taken away.
But actually, where we're planting in Brazil, we've got 3% left of what was the Atlantic rainforest. Where we're planting in Nepal, we've got between 3 and 7% left of what was the Japa forest. Where we're planting in Kenya, the forest is gone on the north slopes of Mount Kenya. And what people don't seem to understand about trees, apart from almost anything, is that there are rain creators. If you have a forested continent, the updraft of the transpiration and the water that they actually create through the heating, especially in the tropics, pulls in water from the oceans. So they don't just create rain by seeding it and transpiring it, they also bring the moisture that is required from the oceans. When you deforest, the oceans pull the water back off the land. So because of deforestation, we've lost 50% of our rain already on this planet, and we're heating. So why the tropics for us is a multifaceted thing. First, when I had the car crash in which Tree Sisters was given to me, they said you have to reforest the tropics within 10 years. That was before I fully understood why Gaia, in her absolute brilliance, had arranged ice at her caps to cool, and then fast-growing tropical trees around her waist where it's the hottest, so that she could use that heat to create the cooling and the rainfall, that then the pressure difference between the hot and the cold allows the hydrological cycle that actually makes our world livable, makes our world fertile, that basically moves rain around the place. And so for me, when we're talking about trees, we're not just talking about climate change. Of course we want fast-growing tropical trees, forests, actually forests everywhere. We need all of them to get our carbon out of the atmosphere, but it's more than carbon. It's rainfall in a huge way, and it's hydrological balancing, it's meteorological balancing. They are the great stabilizers. We can't lose them, simply said.
But you're talking about currently planting huge numbers of trees.
We're planting over 2 million a year across 8 ecosystems in 6 tropical countries.
Here's me boasting of 8,000 acres in...
Boast. It's a lot more expensive in England than it is in Madagascar.
Sure is.
You know, and our projects have very different price points, and our cheapest trees are 10 cents. These are mangroves in Madagascar. Why? Because you don't need nurseries. You don't, you know, and they grow like billio. In this particular place, you take a seed, you stick it in the ground, it grows, and by the next year it's producing more seeds. They call it a 250% growth rate. But across all our projects, where our most expensive in southern India, you can't grow a tree without drip irrigation because the monsoons have failed and industrial agriculture has sucked the groundwater dry. Trees cannot put their roots down and find anything. The rivers are drying up, 9 rivers already gone. And so when you average out everything, we come at a much lower cost than you'll ever find growing trees in the UK. But the wonderful thing about tropical trees is there are some species that will be my height the first year you plant them. Whereas in England, it's like your oak is this big and it's wonderful, but a fast-growing forest that has a year-long growing season, you know, tropical trees sequester carbon 3 times as fast as temperate. Because of that fact, they don't rest in the winter. Therefore, there is great purpose. But more than that, it is because we cannot lose that belt, not just for cooling, but for biodiversity, and almost especially for the indigenous knowledge that is essential if humanity is going to make the shift out of this dominant state that we're in back into reverence with the natural world.
But you're talking massive numbers of people involved, and that takes organisation.
Takes organisation, which is not what I do.
In so many different places.
Yes. But the trick to trying to do anything like this is to find people that know what they're doing. So we have a very rigorous process of assessing potential partners, and especially partners who are specialists in the countries that they work in, who really know how to work, and especially those that honour and work with the local people and help the local people take ownership over the project. It's absolutely essential that it's not just, I won't do drones, like everything was like, oh, let's use technology to solve this. The technology that is needed is love. The technology that is needed is the human heart back in relationship with the natural world to the extent that we cannot destroy it anymore. And the fundamental relationship is between human and trees. And so we very specifically look at projects that are helping people understand all the different ways that they can both restore ecosystems through the trees themselves, but restore their own livelihoods through the trees, restore their dignity, get out of malnutrition. In Madagascar, we're getting people out of slavery. We didn't even know that was happening. But because Madagascar is raped, because they've taken the highland forest and they've taken the lowland forest and they've taken the mangroves, and the mountains just bleed into the sea, that soil doesn't just strip the land, but it also disrupts the coral. And so whilst we've got climate change disrupting coral, we've also got soil erosion disrupting coral, and the fish stocks disappear. And so the people of Madagascar around the coasts, who require fish in order to live, but also require fish yields in order to be able to pay what they call the fish barons, who have boats and nets for them to be able to loan. If they go out and they come back without a yield, then they're in indentured slavery to those people, and essentially that means you can't work anywhere else, you can't earn. If you can't feed your children, they die. Or you give your women away. So helping these coastal villages become reforesters is a massive social statement.
Well, let's take Madagascar, because that's a very good example. I mean, it's been troubled by much more even than you've mentioned. I mean, I think it was South Korea bought up huge amounts of acreage and planted things which were not natural to the local environment, and they lost a lot of trees. And I wonder where you start. I mean, who did you find first? Where?
We found Eden Projects, who actually were originally religious and humanitarian, and who went to Madagascar because they were looking at poverty alleviation. And so they were working with how do we basically get these people out of extreme poverty. And the win-win-win is help them get out of poverty by doing something that actually then creates a virtuous circle, in which case bring back the mangrove forests, which essentially stops all the erosion pouring off into the ocean, which then protects the coral. The mangroves are the fishing that produce the fishing grounds. The only things you have to worry about baby mangroves is whether the crabs walk off with them, which is better in other countries. But they're bringing back the fish yield. So you've got the people getting out of poverty because we're paying them a wage to become reforesters. Their wage brings them, they can feed their children, they can get their children back into school, they can do healthcare, and they're protecting the land.
We arrive in Madagascar, we arrive, and you find a village chieftain, a farmer? I mean, where
Steve from
start?
Eden Projects arrives in Madagascar,
Okay.
and Steve is a dude who has lived all over the world and is not frightened by cultures that I would basically completely flounder in. And he knows how to work with them. So they go into the villages and they start talking to the villagers, and yes, they would talk to the village chiefs, and they start looking at community land and community land ownership, and then what they could do for them, and then who there could be trained to take positions of authority inside of that.
And Tree Sisters?
And Tree Sisters, we primarily exist to raise awareness, to plant seeds in the heart and minds of the masses, but also to normalize reciprocity with nature. So our role is basically to say, if we're warming our world, we have to cool it. If we're getting in a car, if we're flicking on a switch, if we're eating food that's been flown, we're warming our world, every single one of us. Climate change is coming, it's like it's here now. I mean, we're in it. Everyone's still saying, when the tipping points, they've all tipped. The reality is it's not just the 11th hour, we've probably gone past 12. And so there is a fundamental responsibility that each of us have to this world that has given us everything. It's given us everything we need, everything we want, the bodies we have, the bodies of all the people that we love, our homes, you name it. There's nothing that we have that hasn't been taken, and yet what do we give back? Because we live in a culture that has normalized dominance over nature to such a degree that our convenience has made any future for today's children a complete inconvenience, or actually possibly an impossibility. So for us, it's not about scare tactics, it's about generating an emotional connection back to mother, back to the one that is giving us everything. Sort of seeing if we can, we're very experimental. How do you remove the veil that has us in this trance of normalized dominance? And then how do we reach through and say, okay, one gesture is that every single one of us could actually be giving back to balance off our warming with cooling. If I thought it would be so easy. This is the thing. I thought, oh my God, trees, of course, fast-growing tropical trees. If we have this many million of us just giving like this, that's a tsunami of giving. Then we just have to find the infrastructure and we can just plant the trees. And whilst we're figuring out how to wean ourselves off a carbon economy, we can be regreening everything in sight and basically giving ourselves a chance. But actually, it's been really, really difficult because collective consciousness is rooted in consumption. We're called consumers. We're not called restorers. We're not even called citizens anymore. We're labeled by the act of taking, which is fundamentally remarkably disrespectful to the brilliance and the love and the capacity for care. Makes me want to weep. I probably cry during this, so just bear with me, just cry with me. That we are. And so, why women inside of Tree Sisters? Is that because I'm disqualifying men? Absolutely not. But we have a profound lack of feminine leadership in this world. And when I say feminine leadership, I'm not saying women dressed up as men, trying to match the men, trying to outmen the men. I'm talking about women who are connected enough to what we actually are, which is not what we've been taught at all, as aspects of nature who have the womb, the moon in our wombs that actually have cyclical natures, that understand the cycles of life and death because it happens in us consistently, who can bring through a different consciousness, and who are oriented to relationship. It's relationship that is missing. It's the heart that is missing. We've turned our relationship with this planet into something of a commodity, as if somehow if we trash the whole thing just to make money, we're going to survive, and we're not. So we essentially are, I hate this language, but it's what comes out of my mouth, like raising an army of love, love in action on behalf of nature, helping women to remember that we're not what we've been taught, and to start feeling our way towards solutions that aren't coming from here, but that are coming from here, because this is made of the natural world. The natural world doesn't waste a damn thing. She is infinitely brilliant, and all of her brilliance is inside of us. So if we can get out of this or start to match it with this or this, there's a chance that we can start to bring through a different quality of leadership that could create new solutions, that shift the paradigm. We've got, as far as I'm concerned, 5 years to shift the paradigm. And it's a big shift, but it's already happening. And it's so interesting that we've got Extinction Rebellion out there saying, tell the truth. Tell the truth. Why aren't our governments telling the truth? Why aren't they giving us the chance to rise up and discover what we're actually capable of if we take this seriously?
I'm actually quite intrigued, having just had to push my bicycle round, how annoyed people are with them without actually thinking what it's all about.
They are, Extinction Rebellion are standing for every single one of us in this room. They're standing, I'm going to cry, here we go. They're standing for every child. I woke up a few weeks ago and I thought, there's not a single child that is going to be born now that will ever have what any of us had. It's gone. And Extinction Rebellion are trying to say, can we do something about that, please? And everyone's going, get out of my way, I want to carry on with business as normal. Business as normal is over.
I mean, some of us here, certainly speaking for myself, feel to be somewhat linear. You know what I mean? I mean, kind of plugged into and still utilizing the world that is destroying the world. Yeah. And therefore, what I'm trying to reach out to you for is, what is the route from what you believe you are doing to link in with the people who are still defoliating the world?
Defoliating, there's a word. That's a really intelligent question. Give me a moment to formulate a thought.
Well, the thing is, I feel a long way from Madagascar. Yeah. Seriously, I can see, I have been there, so I know what you're talking about, but I'm not sure what I have to do to help Madagascar with Tree Sisters.
Well, I mean, essentially, at
That's a rather linear question.
yeah, but it's a great question. And at the most basic level, what we're doing is we're gathering funds from every single person and we're sending it to the tropics. You know, if everyone in this room gave as much as they could give every month, not just the least to feel good, but the most, because it matters, you know, how many millions of trees, more trees could we be planting? You know, when, if I think about the scale of the industries that exist, so for instance, the health and wellness and beauty industry, 3.7 trillion. Every industry in the world basically is acting as if you can take and money can be made out of extracting whatever from the earth. Now, what if we decided collectively as part of the paradigm shift that we are going to have to create ourselves, everyone in this room, to embed restoration inside of every financial transaction? What if you can't take from the planet anymore without giving back? What if that becomes the new normal? The new normal that we're trying to create inside of Tree Sisters is dynamic reciprocity. You don't take without giving back. You don't heat without cooling. Basic level of responsibility. So
it's rather interesting that the industries that you mentioned are the ones that have stepped forward and given the nigh on 1 billion euros to restore Notre Dame. But if we had asked them for that money to restore the rainforest, they would have said, well, very nice meeting you.
the issue is, I know I listened and they were like, oh, this family is going to give 100 million. I'm like, 100 million? How many trees could we plant? What could we actually do? But the point is, and this is actually what makes Tree Sisters unique. Yes, there's planting trees. Absolutely. Yes, there's waking people up. The fundamental issue is consciousness shift.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I haven't found another environmental organization trying to tackle in the way that we're tackling. You know, Tree Sisters sits at the confluence of gender, climate change, restoration, behavior change, and consciousness shift. That's like a magic fivesome there, like our absolute core things. Paul Hawken got behind us, the guy who did Project Drawdown, 100 Greatest Solutions to Climate Change. He rang me up one day and said, do you realize you've got the ultimate solution? And because he'd been doing the numbers, and women and trees came up so much in the top 10 of the 100 solutions to climate change, when you put them together, they came out number 1. And I was like, wow, that's amazing that people are cottoning on to this. But he said, actually, the biggest thing, the biggest solution is consciousness shift. And I was like, yeah, and we're doing that as well. So this state that we're in, this normalized state of dominance, it's just, I mean, that's what you mean. You call it linear. It is linear. It's like we can plow over life and expect life to just keep going without actually considering the fact that the life that we're plowing over is producing everything that we need, including our weather patterns. But the reality is that inside each of us, because we are the earth, is a different truth that is accessible. You just got to figure out how to hit it. It's like being a tuning fork, enough of a tuning fork to the integrity of a human being or the authenticity of a human being, you know, being that thing, like creating a sound or an impulse or a frequency that holds such a level of truth that is kind of permission to come home to yourself. I do not believe the world is thriving in the guise of the world consumer. I do not believe that how we are existing as human beings is creating happiness. Actually, what it's doing is creating more mental illness than ever before, more cancer, more disease, more distress, more dysfunction. Why? Because we're getting further and further away from who we actually are. So the path has to be, how do we start like that journey back to who and what we really are? And that invitation, if it's sounded, you know, our experiment is, do we want to shift collectively from a consumer species to a restorer species? Can we find the languaging that goes ping inside a human heart and they go, oh, I've got to be part of the solution. I can't carry on. You know, that's what Extinction Rebellion are trying to do. They're trying to like bang a gong so loud that enough people go, you know what, I need to be part of the solution. And then as soon as you've made that shift and there's like an opening, there's a curiosity, not just to what needs to be done, but what is in here that might be wanting to come out, you know, what is unlived in each of us. To me, climate change offers us the most astonishing opportunity to discover what we're made of. Like there's no excuse anymore to sit on our gifts or our generosity or our brilliance or our radical behavior. It's time for radical. Really, we get to just go, I've never known what I'm doing. I've started this thing without a clue, but it needed to be done. We're about to see if we can start a major collaboration around Year of the Tree in 2020, and then see if we can map out a whole 10-year plan. Do I know how to do that? No. We're going to find the people that do. We're going to get people in a room, and we're going to sit in collective consciousness and honor the fact that our collective brilliance has to be the thing that brings us through. And if you have an idea, it's time for it. And if you haven't got the guts to do it, find somebody who'll hold your hand, because they'll believe in you. And that has to be the way forward. Like one person with another person and another person daring to step up and say, first of all, I don't know what to do. What can I do? This is what is in me to give. Show me how to give it, and let the world steer you to your brilliance.
Right. Well, let's draw on the collective brilliance. Okay? And from the collective brilliance, get the questions that may steer us. I think we'll sit down now, because
Only questions that make us both sound really intelligent, please.
So let's see if anybody wants to try and penetrate
The lights are really
the
bright.
collective brilliance that is assembled here in Clare. Would anybody like to? Yes, in the middle there.
Julia Hales. It was so interesting that you brought up Notre Dame, because I'd just written that down. And it's so fascinating that that's become like the pinnacle of sort of human endeavour to create this beautiful building. And it's very sad that it's been destroyed in the way that it has. But I think that, I was already thinking I'm going to write a blog about this, because you see the spar collapsing, but there's rainforest being destroyed every day. And how can we get that momentum behind the forests in the same way that in 2 days the French government said 5 years we're going to restore that cathedral, £1 billion already, just like that. And all the time, and we've got people out there trying to tell us that this is what we need to do. So I think it's really exciting that we've got your organisation who are there geared up to do it, and I really hope that we can muster that same sort of energy that Notre Dame has symbolised.
It is a very it's a very interesting thing, that the chiming of things that are happening. We've emerged, most of us in this room who live in Britain, from the most appalling period in which people have been beastly to each other on a scale we haven't seen really since the 30s. And suddenly you get something like Notre Dame or whatever, and people say, my God, we must treasure these things. And then you raise the whole question, as the demonstrators outside are raising, right at the right moment, raising the questions of what is this world about? Is it really about how we trade with Europe, or is it actually about how we're going to save the planet?
Yeah, and what do you do potentially if the Gulf Stream comes to an end? Do you split off from Europe, or do you hang on to each other for dear life? Are we going to distract ourselves endlessly, or are we actually going to start preparing for a different climate because it's coming? The Greenland ice sheet is melting at such a rate that the freezing cold water that's pouring into the Northern Atlantic is now completely disrupting the oceanic currents. We can't go on and think that there isn't going to be massive change and nobody's looking at it. And I do think it has to be grassroots, which is why I'm right behind Extinction Rebellion. I'll be on a bridge tomorrow, because I feel in integrity with myself, even if I'm pissing off a whole load of people who just want to carry on as normal. What we need to actually do is be in integrity with our values and everything that matters to us. The New York Declaration on Forests in 2014 came out and said we need to halve deforestation by 2020. We need to end the deforestation of old-growth forests by 2030. What followed from there was an increase of 46% in deforestation for the following 3 years. 2017 was the worst year of deforestation since 2001. Emissions from the forest have gone up 68%. We're not just going in the wrong direction, we're storming in the wrong direction. But here we are. Here we are. This is the situation that we find ourselves in. We can either be completely awake to it, let it have us, and if you don't cry, basically I don't think you're breathing. If you can let it have you, if you can let your heart break, if you can take it seriously, you will be changed. Because the nature in you will step up and show you who you are and what you're for. And then why you do have the influence that you have, or you have the money that you have, or you have the connections that you have, or you have the positions that you have, that can actually do something if you're no longer prepared to, every time somebody goes, oh, don't talk about that, say, well, actually, I'm not going to stop talking about it. because I have to be in integrity with myself. And when my children or my grandchildren look at me and say, what did you do when you knew this was coming and you knew you were selling us down the Swanee? You can turn around and say, I did everything. I can do that. And I know there are a lot of people in this room that can say it. I do everything, every waking breath, because it matters. Because I can't bear every day on the news reading another species is gone. I can't bear just going along going, oh wow, 70% of the insects have collapsed. Oh look, we're not going to be able to pollinate our food. Oh wow, the storms are getting worse. We have storms now that lift sharks out of the sea and slam them through garden fences in the Caribbean. Storms strong enough not just to knock down trees, but to rip the bark off. And we can't just sit there and go, oh look, more news, so we flick it over. It's a massive, massive opportunity. And here we are. This is it. This is where we're at. And so on some level, there has to be some perfection, even though it feels terrifying. Because the whole trajectory of our human evolution has brought us to here. And that has included patriarchy. And patriarchy cannot sustain life. It's designed to repress the feminine principle. It's designed to suppress life, which is why less than 3% of global giving goes to women and the environment, the life givers of everything. Less than 2% of financing, global financing, goes to reforestation. 40 times that much goes to subsidizing mining and infrastructure development and everything that is going to destroy our forests. We think technology is going to save us. The majority of the precious metals that we require for this smart future are underneath the last intact remaining forest on our planet. This can't happen. What could we do? What could we do collectively if every single person in this room said, this is not going to happen on my watch? What could we do? We could astonish ourselves, but we got to get loud and a bit outrageous and not care about what people think, which is actually really rather freeing, I have to say. You get to wear pink socks.
Yes, in the middle of the table.
So, I'm Stephen Dunbar Johnson from the New York Times. By the way, the Pinot family, one of the people that donated 100 million yesterday, their sustainable development program at Caring is fairly advanced, certainly in terms of most people in the luxury consumer industry. If we're going to get people ready to move from consumers to
restorers,
is it not going to be very effective or more efficient to speak to the likes of Pinot or the CEO of Shell, who actually is a tree obsessive as well, to get those people to integrate the whole message of restoration in their packaging, in their marketing? So when you're buying a product, you are also buying a tree.
Yes, that's one of my...
When you're filling up your tank at a Shell station, you are buying a tree. Is that not a significant part of the solution?
Yes, it's a very significant part of the solution. If I leave Shell out of it just for 1 second. Now I know that they are doing a lot, and I know that they came out and they said that we needed to plant a lot of trees, which is phenomenal. And they're still determined to keep the fossil fuel industry going, and they are the root of a large amount of destruction. And I am the head of a global network of women, and if I even looked at Shell, I would lose them. So much as there is a real call.
Sorry, why would you lose them?
Because they consider Tree Sisters so pure at heart, and even if we were supporting Shell, they would see that we were condoning Shell. So as a being, this being here, I want to personally live an inclusive existence that basically says, okay, every gesture towards doing some good, planting trees inside of any organization is like an opening in the door. The trees themselves will help the consciousness shift that organization will try to steer. As the head of a women's reforestation organization that has extremely pure values, I can't do it with everybody. So we're going to be able to work with some women, not going to be able to work with others. Do I want to embed restoration inside every financial transaction? Yes. I see that as like a bridge between, as consumerism changes, as we denormalize the kind of convenience consumerizing, it's a new word, consumption that we've normalized, as we transition over to a culture that no longer will consume anything without thought for the consequences on future generations, which is where we have to go if we're going to survive. We have to start thinking long term health and viability of everything in the way that the native people of this planet always have, or we won't make it. So the bridge for me is both weaning ourselves off fossil fuels, like really figuring out, weaning ourselves off mindless consumption, waking up to every choice that we make, that we are funding whatever it is that we pay for, we are funding, we're accepting whatever that is. Yes, embedding restoration into every financial transaction, then figuring out whether we need those financial transactions, then completely redefining ourselves. You know, we get to redefine ourselves. We get to ask some really deep questions about what a human being is for, what the human species is for. We apparently have the DNA of every living species in our DNA. They call it junk DNA. I see that as potentially access to the intelligence of every living thing on this planet encoded in us. Are we the superior species? No superior species trashes life for all of everything else. Perhaps the superior species, or this species, has the capacity to bow in humility before the magnificence of the natural world and learn how to be in relationship with it. And maybe we have to almost lose everything in order to figure out the essential sacred value of every living thing and then turn ourselves into the protectors and restorers of those things.
Well, there's something very important, I think, in what you raised, and that is the question whether you permit allies.
Yes.
And you see, for example, today there's a big piece in the news about bowel cancer and eating red meat. Extremely bad for you. Far, far higher instances of bowel cancer with red. Well, heavens, we've wanted to get rid of red meat for years because red meat farts. You know, in putting it crudely, I mean, that's cows, that's beef.
That's methane.
And that's methane,
And
that's one of the most destructive things. So can we be as purist as you are being? Or should we be beginning to branch out and embrace?
I'm not being purist. I don't think just saying right now we can't work with Shell because it would cause too much pandemonium. We're not, as Teresa says, we're not big enough and robust enough to be able to handle the backlash. But I want to help business leaders in any industry I can get my hands on recognize that their customer base is an ecosystem of effective change waiting to be invited to change. I want trees embedded in every product, beauty products, health products, you know, computing.
No, I'm sorry I raised Shell, because I think it's a bit of a distraction. I think the main point
No, but the point is yes.
How to get, for want of a better word, leaders to embed this whole philosophy in the way that they talk to their consumers, because I think there are businesses now that are acutely aware that restorers, let's call them restorers, are wanting to restore, are craving to restore.
Yeah.
But you've got to find a way of allowing them to do so.
Yes.
I think there is a wholesale feeling out there, and it's manifesting itself literally in the streets now. But I think your average person is becoming much more aware of these issues now and wants to do something.
Yes.
And I think people whose businesses are driven through consumption, which are most businesses, need to connect with their future restorers.
Yes.
And so it's about how to help leaders lead.
It's an invitation. I mean, to me, it's the right invitation, and that's what we're in the process of crafting right now. And I do think that the actual the desire on the consumer's part to want to work with values-based organizations, to want to consume through values-based organizations, will drive the markets. And that's another reason why women, because we're 85% of the consumer market. And so when women decide that they're going to only work with those that are giving back, we'll see a swing.
We only have 5 minutes really of this left. So what I want to do is to take a cascade of questions and then you wrap up, right? How's that?
I'll wrap.
Yeah. Let's begin with the two here, yeah.
Isn't part of the solution also talking about the short-term benefits and immediate solutions? Because you talked about the effect on mental health and incidence on disease, etc. So, you know, people think that the solutions are worse than the long-term consequences. What if we tell them that the solutions are going to benefit them in the immediate? And I think there was an OECD study recently that showed that for every dollar spent on greening cities, there was between $5 and $10 reaped in increased health and welfare and productivity. So maybe we should, you know, there's not enough generosity to think about future generations. Why don't we talk more about the benefits right now?
The benefits of the now. Let's keep that as the first one. Just the next one, and then I'll come back to you.
Questions down, please. Can you write answers down?
All right.
Sorry, I'm just asking. My
Uh,
brain can't hold question.
In the green,
I was.
the most apt colour to be wearing today.
So, do you think investors can help with this by demanding we only invest in, or so that we demand of the companies we want to invest in that they've thought about where their supply chains come from and their impact on forests?
Very good question. Yeah,
Can you
and
hold these in your head?
I've got them all in my head. and two more, although we seem to be favouring the left for some reason. Yeah.
The general public is very aware of the issue of plastic,
Yeah.
because of David Attenborough, whatever. How about when people gather up 10 plastic bottles, instead of getting a £1 coin back, we actually plant 10 trees in Madagascar?
Great idea. Great idea. And finally, yes.
So a more practical question. So I run a skincare business, and we do operate in my company to be carbon negative, or we do conservation work in the Amazonian rainforest to offset our carbon. But I would like to understand what the cost is associated with tree planting and how much investment a company will need to make in order to make an actual difference to the trees that we need to plant.
Very good. So let's go first to your question.
You hold this in your head.
Well, I've got the investment, the immediate benefits, the short term, giving people a sense that something they're doing right now is going to do something right now.
Yes, I'll just agree with you. I mean, you know, we're always experimenting with messaging. We're always experimenting with what gets through. And so, yes, I totally agree with you, and we'll have a go.
And the role of the investor and the potential for them to bring this through into the company.
Role of the investors, absolutely. Role of shareholders need to wake up to it's not just profit. That we can't just work with money in the way that we have done. Yes, as investors, as shareholders, we need to start demanding real, genuine action that is not just getting the money back. And I'd go further to say foundations. You know, we're running out of time so much now. We need foundations who are much more bold, much more risky. You know, Tree Sisters, we've had such a time getting funding because we're holistic, because we're multifaceted. And we don't just sit in one pot, we sit in multiple pots. And so the need is to think, okay, those institutions that have money, what is the most we can do in the next 5 years? Not just these 25-year plans. If we're going to flip something, we need to start really thinking about a very short timeline and how much risk are we willing to take and how much action are we willing to take.
And your question, which was
About the
the link, isn't that a great
that's just
idea?
brilliant.
Yeah, terrific.
And I love it because water and trees coexist, so it's a perfect matching.
I mean, the core,
Sorry?
the government, I mean, how far in could you get a blessing from the government on tax incentives?
I don't know, but it's not my area, and it may be the area of somebody else in this room. You know, the work of Tree Sisters is grassroots. This is public mobilization. This is behavior change from the bottom up. Top down hasn't worked. So my aim is bottom up to see if I can help the humanity and people switch back on again.
And I should say that if you're planting trees in this country on any scale, every single tree is paid for. The actual tree is paid for by the European Union. I'm not sure I've heard that anywhere on the trail, but never mind. And that is government in a sense, because the British have contributed to that. So there is a role for,
Yeah, no, I just want to.
Question about the cost.
Yeah. So first off, every tree matters. Every single tree makes a difference. With your organisation, which I love, and I use your products, by the way. And my goddaughter is one of your, whatever you call them. She's probably your youngest that you have.
Oh, amazing.
You represent a huge, huge network of education, of mobilization. You know, not just the women that sell your products, but the women that receive your products could be invited into a climate change campaign that they can take action inside of. Beyond just seeding a tree in every product, which I would love to follow you around until you do it, the impact that we have when we work with an organization that is willing to do that is we have access to your entire ecosystem, which is your suppliers, as well as your distributors, as well as your customers. And then if that organization decides that you want to effect major change, then you can have your own goals and you can invite people into it. You know, the cost of a tree for us, which is, for corporates, it's going to be somewhere between 33 and 40 pence. We've got to figure it out because it costs us to work with and build the campaigns, and I would want to campaign with you. And we can't have our donors who are giving to the trees sorting out our corporate campaign, so we've got to figure that out. We're right in the process of that. But it's cheap. It's cheap. It's cheap in comparison to what we're facing. And actually, if your I don't know what you call them, the ladies that sell your products for you, your ambassadors, understood that the work that they're doing is contributing to their children's future, it creates a whole other pride. And then, of course, those people that are actually wanting to buy products that are contributing to their children's future creates a different level of loyalty and an awakening. So think of Tree Sisters as a key that turns and it opens a door to a whole other world of climate change support for women around the world, and men actually, who don't know how to make a difference, but we can help them because, damn, of the consciousness shift work that we do that is so unique that I haven't talked about at all. But just read it from this body, okay? It's in here. Because we've got solutions, really intelligent solutions that matter. And they are at the level of emotional technology, which is the thing that is actually needed to underpin the behavior change.
Well, I think you have opened a door, which is to use your phrase. And I think people are very intrigued by what you have to say. And I'm sure it may lead to a certain amount of action. Let us hope it does. But in the meantime, it really is time for lunch, and for me to say very, very, very many thanks to Clare Dubois for talking to us, lighting us up, and we'll see what we do. But thank you very much. Very sweet of you.